So let's talk about contrast in music production. When people think about contrast in general, they think light and dark, sweet and sour, sweet and salty, whatever it is. And in music production, especially techno music production, most people think about that as being left, right, quieter, louder, low and highs. But there are a couple more ways that you can add in contrast, and contrast in music is actually quite important. So let me give you a little analogy before I talk about a few examples on how you can use contrast in your music production, so your buddies will think you are Chris Liebing, or how you became Chris Liebing in such a short time notice. Short time notice, is that even a thing? I don't know. Okay, let's talk about the analogy. So, contrast. Now, imagine you're in the desert. It's blazing, scorching. That's not the most pleasant experience. It's actually pretty dangerous to be there for the whole day, for example. Whole day out in the desert, no water, whatever. Now, imagine the same sand you're standing on being at the beach, where you have waves, where you have wind, and you can just dive into the water occasionally. Suddenly, this hot water, or not the hot water, suddenly this hot environment, and with the water, which contrasts this, becomes one of the most pleasant things you can do, one of the most greatest things on earth you can do. So contrast is important. Contrast is something that balances out extremes. So let's talk about a few examples. Let me check my list real quick. All right, so the first one we have is when you have something that is rhythmically very complex, then you need, don't take this too serious with all the need, but give it a try. Or maybe you've heard that in some other tracks already. So let's say you have very rhythmically complex track in your, or a part in your track, a breakbeat, for example. Now the breakbeat itself, if you want to add in more elements, no, that's not the point that I want to make. Let's cut that out. So the breakbeat itself will sound amazing, but it may be a little bit too hectic, and the listener needs something to anchor to, something. Again, we're always looking for balance and trying to make things somewhat even in life. So the listener needs something to have a lock into, needs to be something like, well, maybe you native speakers find a better word for that. So let me give you the example. So if you have a breakbeat and you add in a droning pad, suddenly you have something really great. The droning pad is nice and steady, while you have that breakbeat that is rhythmically rich, where a lot of things are happening. Now, if you were to add in another breakbeat, that would probably hard to listen to. Having two breakbeats, unless they are set up and designed in a way that they complement each other, but in that case, I wouldn't count them as two different things. So if you have one element that's rhythmically very complex, add something that is nice and steady in the background. Another good example is if you have a really driving techno beat with some 16th hi-hats and a clap coming on. Again, a pad there in the background will give everything a nice backdrop, so both can really shine. Talking about complex. No, that's actually pretty pretty comparable if I think about it now. You know, I have my list here with a lot of things that I want to talk about, and complex and simple is there too. So we have busy and calm, so complex and simple. All right. Let's say you have a synth line and it's been modulated with an LFO. Maybe you have a step sequencer where you change filter values, and it's very, very busy. Then having not a constant thing going on, but a tone or an element that is very plain. So again, you're creating this contrast here. And another way to go about that is wet and dry. So depending on the genre, of course, you can drown pretty much everything in effects like delay, reverb, what have you. But it's always a good practice to also have something that is dry as a bone. And again, the dry thing will pop out a lot, while the very wet signal will stay nicely in the background. Also helps round off the whole track in general. So when you have a track which is very dry, maybe add something that is super wet. Can be mono, of course. Doesn't have to be stereo if you want to keep it narrow. One thing that you can try while talking about stereo and panning, have your dry sound on one side, let's say to the left side, and then have the affected signal. Let's say you have a similar sound or maybe a completely different sound that is that's drenched in reverb, maybe just a short reverb or a longer reverb. Make this reverb mono and have that on the different side. And let me know how you like that. All right, so next up we have fast and slow. So fast and slow in one track can be that you have, again, something that is rather hectic, but counter that with an element that is very slow. A good example here is if the 808 kick drums on trap music, which are countered by the 16th hi-hat and the 30th ratcheting that you always hear, where they change the pitch up and down every so often. That sounds amazing, and it works because it is contrasting each other. Of course, it's also contrasting on the frequency spectrum, because you have one element that's low end and you have the other element that's high end. Bring up the mic. That's something to consider. All right, next one is long and short. This plays kinda into the previous example, but let's talk about low end and kick drums, for example. If you have a big boomy kick drum, which is very long, having a bass line that is also very long and boomy and sustaining, will almost always end up in being super muddy. That's hard to listen to. It's almost impossible to mix unless you do sidechaining, which, well, sidechaining will probably not do the trick, because it's just the nature of sound. So, sidechaining will help in the sense that it is controlling the longer sound, which is making it shorter, and again moving it towards contrast. So a long kick with a short staccato bass line works way better than a long kick and a long bass line. Interestingly, depending on the speed of your track, you will probably need to be your bass drum and your bass line both to be short, but that's due to the short amount of time the sound has to get played. All right. So what else do we have? So all the examples that I just gave you, having something that is busy with something that is more calm, having something that is longer, being together played with something that is short, something complex in sound. This could also mean texture with something that is more simpler in texture. Another example is noise. You can have something that is really noisy and crunched up and counter that with something that is a lot smoother around the edges. Everything noise, not so nice to listen to, but if having one element doing a specific purposeful thing, that's what sounds great. So the last point, almost the last point that I want to make is that all the things that I just mentioned can be applied into one sequence. So, or in one track element. Let's say you have a synth line. What sounds more interesting? A synth line that has always a steady volume. All notes are the same length, and maybe you're just controlling the filter with an LFO, turning it up and down, up and down. That's bassy and boring, but if you change the length of the notes, shorter, long, change the velocity, maybe have a reverb just on a single note coming in every 2 bars, that's creating an interesting pattern, it's creating contrast, and that's making everything more rounded. So the last point that I have on my list is 2 of the same, which is to me the hint on 2 of the same is always gonna be conflicting. To stay with the example from a second ago, if you have 2 tracks, 2 sequences, which is happening a lot, they're kind of fighting for attention, and you're making it hard for the listener to figure out who is the main player now. Now, another analogy here is like 2 people trying to tell you different stories. Both stories may be super interesting, but who are you going to listen to if 2 people are telling their story to you? So what you can do is, first of all, decide which story you want to listen to first, and then use that as a main player, and then save the other one to a different track. So that happens a lot of times to me, of course, when I was beginning to make music, and sometimes it happens to me now, because whenever I make music and have a sequence and want to make something that, well, helps the sequence, I sometimes make something that is also, well, good enough to become a main player. So what do I try? I don't try to get them work together. I separate the 2 and have another sequence for the going. So that's it for today. Let me know how you like this content. Keep all the questions in the comments below. I'd be happy to help and share more of this stuff. And if you have anything that you like to be answered in this type of format, let me know. Take care.